What if the worst moment of your life was actually your rebirth? What if a prison cell, cold and gray, became the classroom that unlocked your destiny? What if the man the world once called a criminal rose from the ashes to become one of the most powerful voices in human history? This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Malcolm X, but not the Malcolm X you think you know. Today, we're diving deep into the 3 psychological turning points that transformed Malcolm Little, a street hustler, into El Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, a man whose words could shake governments. This is not just a biography. This is a blueprint, because Malcolm X didn't just survive prison, he weaponized it. In this video, you'll witness how prison didn't break him, it remade him, how identity, belief, and strategy collided behind bars, and how no matter your past can unlock your purpose through discipline, transformation, and inner fire. We'll uncover the dark psychology of how identity is destroyed and rebuilt, the daily habits Malcolm forged in isolation, the shocking mental shift that changed everything, and the code of honor he lived by until his final breath. These aren't just history lessons, they're fuel for your own rise, because we all have our own form of prison, a past, a mistake, a limitation. But like Malcolm said, don't be in such a hurry to condemn a person because he doesn't do what you do or think as you think. There was a time when you didn't know what you know today. Let's begin with the world he was born into, not the icon, but the boy who was broken before he learned how to fight. Before there was Malcolm X, there was Malcolm Little. Born in 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska, Malcolm was no stranger to chaos. His father, Earl Little, was a proud follower of Marcus Garvey, a black nationalist who taught self-reliance and pride in African heritage. That made Earl a target. The Little family was hounded by white supremacists, stalked by the Klan, and constantly forced to move. When Malcolm was just 6 years old, his father was found dead body crushed by a streetcar. The police called it an accident. The family knew better. His mother, Louise, was left to raise 8 children on her own. She was strong, proud, and deeply intelligent, but society had no place for a black woman with a spine. Over time, the pressure crushed her spirit. Louise was eventually institutionalized, and Malcolm, he became a ward of the state, a product of the system. This wasn't just the loss of family, it was the loss of foundation. From that point forward, Malcolm learned a cruel lesson. No one was coming to save him. The young Malcolm bounced between foster homes, reform schools, and cold institutions. He was bright, brilliant, in fact, but constantly told to lower his ambition. One white teacher famously told him, "Be realistic, Malcolm. You should think about becoming a carpenter, not a lawyer." That moment stuck like a scar. You see, before Malcolm X ever stood before microphones, he was told to shrink himself. So he rebelled, not out of ignorance, but out of fire. He moved to Boston, then Harlem, diving headfirst into the underworld. Suits sharp as knives, swagger untouchable, he hustled, ran numbers, dealt drugs, and robbed homes. But what was he really doing wearing armor? Because when the world tells you you're worthless, sometimes the only way to survive is to become the villain in their story. He became Detroit Red, a street legend, but behind the charm and the ego was a young man running from trauma, fatherless rage, and a stolen identity. And that's exactly when his world would collapse. Because one day in 1946, at just 20 years old, Malcolm was arrested for burglary and sentenced to 8-10 years in prison. The hustler's game was over. The mask was cracked, but behind those bars, something began to shift. This is where the real story begins. The prison didn't just take away his freedom, it forced him to face himself. In the next section, we dive into Malcolm's first case of psychological transformation, the death of the hustler identity and the birth of awareness. Let's be clear, Malcolm wasn't born a hustler. He was made into one, and this is critical to understand. Identity is often not chosen. It's inherited through pain, environment, and survival. When society locks you out of legitimacy, you find your worth in the shadows. In Harlem and Roxbury, Detroit Red wasn't just surviving, he was performing. He was the slickest dresser, the fastest talker, the smoothest mover, but it was all a mask, a strategy. He studied the world of pimps, gangsters, and con men like a student studying law. Because in his eyes, that was the real law, the code that governed the streets. For Malcolm, crime wasn't rebellion, it was recognition. Each robbery was a twisted form of validation. Each lie a defense mechanism. He even started straightening his hair with toxic lye, burning his scalp to look respectable. What he didn't realize was he was destroying himself to be seen by a system that despised him. And that's the tragedy for so many. When the world tells you that you're dangerous, ugly, or unworthy sometimes, you lean into it. You become what they fear, but here's the twist. Malcolm X's criminal path wasn't a sign of weakness. It was proof of potential. The same intelligence, charisma, and strategic thinking he used to run scams he would later use to lead a movement. Crime was his first classroom, not because it was righteous, but because it forced him to think in systems. And like any great strategist, once he realized he was playing the wrong game, he built a new one. That moment came when the bars slammed shut. In 1946, sentenced to prison, stripped of the suits, the girls, the freedom, Malcolm was left alone with something he had never faced before, himself. No more stage, no more identity to hide behind, just steel, silence, and a man staring in the mirror. In the next section, we explore the psychological death of ego and how Malcolm X in a cell with no future began to rewire his mind and soul for transformation. They say prison breaks you, but for Malcolm, it peeled him open. No silk suits, no nightclub glow, no stage to perform on, just concrete, steel, and a silence so thick it screamed back at him, and in that silence something began to die. His ego, because the thing about ego is this, it feeds on distraction, but prison removes all distraction. It strips you of your roles, your masks, your illusions. Malcolm entered that cell as Detroit Red, slick, fast, fearless. But inside he was lost, and for the first time he was forced to look at his own reflection, not in a mirror, but in the lives of the broken men around him. He saw what he would become if nothing changed. Prison didn't just confine his body, it trapped his mind in a cage of unfulfilled potential. That realization hit hard, but here's what separates Malcolm from most. He didn't run from the pain, he leaned in. This was the beginning of a psychological death, the kind of death that precedes transformation. And transformation needs a spark. That spark came in the form of letters. One day, Malcolm received a message from his brothers and sisters outside. They told him about a new way of life, a belief system rooted in self, discipline, respect, and knowledge, the Nation of Islam. At first, he laughed. He thought it was just another con, another fantasy to kill time in a lifeless place. But then they told him to study, to open a book, to sharpen his mind like he once sharpened his street game, and so he did. He read, obsessively, dictionaries, history books, religious texts, political theory. He didn't just read words, he devoured truth. He copied entire dictionaries by hand to rebuild his vocabulary. He went to war with his ignorance, and every page was a weapon. The more he learned, the more he shed old skin. He began to see the world and himself through a new lens. That's when he stopped being Malcolm Little and began becoming Malcolm X. In the next section, we enter Case 2, The Awakening, where prison didn't just become his cage. It became his cathedral. What happens when a man is reborn not by chance, but by choice? In prison, most men serve time, but Malcolm commanded his time. He didn't just read books, he waged war with them. In his tiny cell, under dim prison lights, Malcolm devoured the words of Gandhi, Marx, Gibbon, Plato, Tolstoy, Du Bois, and Elijah Muhammad. The prison library became his sanctuary, the dictionary his holy text. He copied every single page word by word until he knew the language better than most scholars. Why? Because Malcolm knew something most never learn. Words are weapons. Words move armies. Words tear down systems. Words reshape identity, and he was sharpening his sword, one syllable at a time. Then came the letters, dozens of them sent to senators, universities, libraries. He requested books. He asked questions. And he found a new brotherhood. The Nation of Islam, through correspondence and prison converts, offered Malcolm a radical shift in perspective. They told him he was not a criminal by nature. He was a victim of a system designed to erase his worth. His anger was not weakness, it was energy waiting to be focused. Under the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm learned discipline, dietary codes, prayer, fasting, and mental focus. But even more than belief, he found structure. And structure gave him strength. The Nation offered Malcolm what the streets never could, a mission. This was his second psychological rebirth. Case 2 wasn't about crime or punishment. It was about meaning. He began giving speeches to fellow inmates. He debated. He led prayer. The guards watched him change from firecracker to philosopher. And in that change, Malcolm discovered something that would fuel him for life. Purpose isn't found, it's built. One habit, one belief, one battle at a time. Malcolm was preparing for a world that had written him off, and when he walked out of that prison in 1952, he didn't leave as a free man, he left as a force of nature. In the next section, we dig deep into the dark psychology of Malcolm's transformation and ask the critical question, was this change genuine, or was he simply indoctrinated by a new master? Let's pause for a moment. We've witnessed Malcolm's transformation from hustler to scholar, from inmate to intellectual, but here's a darker question we must ask. Was Malcolm truly free? Or was he simply reprogrammed, because where there is transformation, there is influence? And in Malcolm's case, that influence was the Nation of Islam, founded on the belief that the black man is divine and the white man a devil. That ideology was radical, unforgiving, absolute. To Malcolm, it made perfect sense. A world that murdered his father, institutionalized his mother, laughed at his dreams. Of course, he embraced a doctrine that flipped the script. It gave him power, identity, clarity, but here's the danger. Clarity without questioning becomes a cage. This is where dark psychology steps in. Because cults don't just recruit, they reshape your lens on reality. They offer total certainty in a chaotic world. And Malcolm was a perfect candidate, intelligent, angry, charismatic, and desperate for belonging. The Nation didn't just give him belief, they gave him a new identity, X, a symbol of the unknown, the lost African name stolen by slavery. And that was genius. It was marketing, it was psychological warfare. You remove the old self, you give the person a number, a symbol, a purpose, and now they're reborn under your flag. In dark psychology, this is called identity collapse and reformation. Step 1, destroy the subject's path. Step 2, isolate them from conflicting influences. Step 3, introduce a new framework of belief. Step 4, make the subject feel chosen, elite part of a higher mission. Malcolm wasn't just a student, he became the nation's sharpest sword. But here's where things get complicated. Even if it started as indoctrination, Malcolm wasn't passive. He questioned, challenged, pushed boundaries, and eventually he outgrew the cage he had been given. Because true transformation doesn't stop with awakening, it demands evolution. In the next section, we enter Case 3, the public fire, brand where Malcolm becomes a national figure, lighting up a generation with fire, truth, and controversy. And unknowingly walking straight into a crisis of purpose. After his release from prison, Malcolm X exploded onto the national stage. He was no longer just a man with a past, he was a voice for millions hungry for change. His speeches were electric, his charisma undeniable, by any means necessary. He declared words that burned like wildfire. He challenged the civil rights status quo. He confronted white supremacy head-on, and that made him many things, a hero to some, a threat to others. But behind the microphone was a man wrestling with immense pressure. The nation of Islam was growing fast, and Malcolm was its star. Yet the weight of expectations pressed down. He had to be perfect, the fighter, the preacher, the strategist, the role model. Any misstep could unravel everything. Meanwhile, Malcolm's views began to evolve. His travels to Mecca and Africa opened his eyes to a global human struggle, not just a black vs. white battle. That broadened vision put him at odds with the nation's leadership, and when he broke away, the spotlight didn't dim it, intensify it. He became a lone warrior with a bigger mission but fewer allies. This chapter reveals the dark psychology of fame, how adulation and scrutiny can create internal conflicts, how success can isolate the very person who earned it. Malcolm faced enemies outside and demons inside. The man who once embraced rage now preached unity and human rights, but that transformation came with consequences. It's a story of courage, of betrayal, and of ultimate sacrifice. In the next section, we explore Malcolm's final breakthrough and legacy, showing how he turned struggle into purpose and purpose into power for generations to come. In the final years of his life, Malcolm X underwent his most profound transformation yet. The man who once preached separation now spoke of unity and universal human rights. His pilgrimage to Mecca had shattered the walls of racial division that once defined him. He saw Muslims of all colors, all nations united as brothers and sisters. This was his final breakthrough, the power of empathy, inclusion, and collective action. Malcolm's message evolved from rage to reason, from division to connection, yet his journey wasn't just about ideology. It was about personal growth, the willingness to confront one's own flaws, change course, and embrace new truths. His legacy is a testament to the human spirit's capacity to rise from the darkest prisons, both literal and metaphorical. To those watching this video, remember this: your past does not define your future. You have the power to rewrite your story. Malcolm X's life is proof that no cage is permanent, no identity is fixed, no obstacle is unbeatable. So, whether you're trapped by circumstance, doubt, or fear, know this: transformation begins with a choice, and with every choice, you build a new legacy. In the next section, we'll break down the key success strategies inspired by Malcolm's journey, practical lessons you can apply in your own life today. Malcolm X's life is a masterclass in transformation, but what can you learn from it? Let's break down the core strategies that made him unstoppable. 1. Embrace radical self-education. Malcolm wasn't handed knowledge, he hunted it. In prison, he devoured books, building his vocabulary, expanding his mind. Success demands the same hunger. Be relentless in learning, read, question, and never settle for ignorance. 2. Reclaim your identity. Malcolm shed his slave name, Little, and adopted X to symbolize lost heritage. Your identity isn't fixed. You can redefine yourself at any moment. Take ownership of who you are and refuse to be defined by others. 3. Use adversity as fuel. Every challenge Malcolm faced, from racism to imprisonment, became fuel for his fire. Instead of breaking you, hardship can build you. Harness your pain, let it drive you forward. 4. Build a vision beyond yourself. Malcolm's mission was never just personal success. It was about uplifting a community, a race, humanity itself. When your vision transcends you, your impact multiplies. 5. Evolve relentlessly. Perhaps Malcolm's greatest strength was his ability to evolve from hustler to prisoner, prisoner to preacher, preacher to global human rights advocate. Never fear growth, even if it means challenging everything you once believed. These principles aren't just history, they're a roadmap. Apply them, transform your setbacks into setups, rewrite your narrative. Become the architect of your own destiny. In the final section, we'll reflect on the profound lessons Malcolm X's journey teaches about human potential and the power within all of us to rise. Malcolm X's journey proves that true power lies in the courage to transform and the relentless pursuit of purpose. Your past doesn't define you, your choices do.